The calm before the storm, hook and suspense. The day began like any other on the orbiting space station. Quiet, routine, and far from any real threat. Commander Sarah Blake paced through the control room, checking the station's systems. She looked out at the endless blackness of space, the stars twinkling far away, the silence almost soothing. Everything seems normal, she muttered to herself, sipping her coffee. The crew was in good spirits. It was just another day of maintaining Earth's defenses from afar. The quiet hum of the station and the occasional beep of instruments filled the air. But then, a loud alarm pierced the silence. Warning: unknown object detected on long-range sensors, approaching rapidly. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The calmness of the morning shattered instantly. The crew rushed to their stations. Sarah's fingers flew across the control panel, her mind racing. "What the hell is that?" she muttered under her breath. Her eyes scanned the readout. The object was moving fast, much faster than anything they had seen before. It wasn't any ship or satellite they recognized. "Is it a meteor?" her communications officer, Lieutenant Marks, asked, his voice shaky. "No, it's too controlled for that," Sarah replied, her mind already in overdrive. "It's a warship, but from where? There's no known fleet in this sector." "Prepare for possible engagement," she ordered. The tension in the room grew thicker with every passing second. The unknown ship was still coming closer. It didn't take long for them to realize something was wrong. The object wasn't just a warship, it was huge. The sensors couldn't identify the ship's origins. It was like nothing Earth had ever built or seen. As Sarah stared at the data streaming in, her thoughts turned dark. The Earth had never been truly prepared for war beyond its own borders. They had all hoped for peace, peace in the stars. But peace had always been fragile. And now, an unknown enemy was on their doorstep. The ship on the radar wasn't just another unknown force. The readings indicated something much worse, something more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Sarah's crew quickly set up defensive measures, readying their weapons systems, shields, and communication channels. But despite the preparations, no one could shake the feeling of unease that had settled over them. The size of the warship was unfathomable. It was moving with purpose, not just drifting or floating in space. This was no random encounter. "Commander, the ship is now on a direct course toward us," said Lieutenant Marks, his voice trained. "They're locking on." "Locking on? Are they scanning us?" Sarah asked, her pulse quickening. "It's worse than that," Marks replied, his hands trembling as he worked the console. "The ship has detected us. They've targeted us." A cold chill ran down Sarah's spine. The thought that their small station, floating in the vastness of space, could be so easily targeted was terrifying. Her crew had always been prepared for smaller threats, rogue ships, pirates, and the occasional broken-down satellite. But this was different. This wasn't just a ship on a collision course. This was an enemy that had found them. Sarah quickly called for a meeting. The crew gathered in the command center. Their faces were tense, worry written all over them. "What do we know about this ship?" Sarah asked, her voice calm despite the storm of panic raging inside her. The crew scrambled to gather any available information. "There are no known ships like this in any Earth database," Lieutenant Marks said, his face pale. "Its energy signature is unlike anything we've seen before. It's advanced, far beyond our capabilities." "Where are they from? Who are they?" Sarah demanded. "I need answers now." There was silence. No one had the answers. The crew had trained for all types of situations, but this was beyond their worst nightmare. "We need to warn Earth," Sarah said after a long pause. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. "Prepare to send a distress signal." But as they tried to send out the warning, another shock hit them. Warning: communication systems jammed. Enemy interference detected. Sarah's eyes widened. What the hell is going on? The enemy ship wasn't just targeting them. It was blocking any way for them to call for help. They were isolated, cut off from the rest of the world. And all they had left was each other and the hope that they could somehow survive the coming storm. Suddenly, the ship's course shifted again. It was now coming even closer. The crew could now see its massive silhouette against the backdrop of stars. It wasn't just a ship. It was an empire, an unknown force, one that was coming straight for Earth's frontier. "Get ready for impact," Sarah ordered, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying her fear. The room was quiet. Tension filled the air. The calm before the storm was over. This was no longer just an alert. The fight for survival was beginning. The crew stared at the approaching warship. They had no idea who the enemy was or what they wanted, but one thing was certain: humanity was about to face a test unlike any before. The warship, a giant of metal and fire, was coming, and they would have to fight back with everything they had. Suspense. What happens next? Will they survive? Could humanity's greatest strength be enough to defeat an enemy they don't even understand? The answers were out there, just beyond the vastness of space, and time was running out. The unknown threat. The station's lights flickered as the warship drew closer, its immense size casting a long shadow over the tiny human outpost. Sarah felt a cold sweat on her brow as she stared at the approaching giant on the radar. The crew was tense, every eye on the control panels, watching the warship's every move. "We're still not picking up any communication signals from them," Lieutenant Marks reported, his fingers flying over the console. "No response to our distress signal. It's as if they can hear us, but they don't care." Sarah clenched her fists, her thoughts racing. If they didn't respond to their calls for help, then they were truly on their own. They'd have to figure out everything on their own: who the enemy was, what their intentions were, and most importantly, how to survive. "Have they reached weapons range yet?" Sarah asked. "Not yet," said her weapons officer, Ensign Keller, his voice tight. "But they're getting close. We're in their sights." Sarah's mind spun. She glanced at the rest of the crew. Fear was in their eyes, but so was determination. They had no choice now. They had to be ready for what was coming. "Commander," Marks suddenly exclaimed. His voice was frantic. "They're locking on. Lockdown initiated. They've locked onto our primary systems. They're preparing to fire." The moment the words left his mouth, the station shook violently. The sound of metal groaning under pressure reverberated throughout the walls. Sparks flew from a nearby control panel as the systems struggled to maintain balance. The lights flickered again, casting the room in eerie shadows. "They've opened fire," Keller shouted, his hands shaking as he worked furiously to raise the shields. A thunderous boom shook the entire station. The station's shields held, but the shockwave was enough to send everyone stumbling. Sarah's heart raced as she steadied herself. They had no way of knowing the full extent of the enemy's power, but that first attack was a clear warning. This enemy was deadly, and they were not to be underestimated. "We've got major hull damage to the outer layers," Ensign Keller reported. "The shields are holding, but for how long? Keep the shields up at all costs." Sarah ordered. She turned toward Marks. "Send a message to Earth again. Tell them we're under attack. This could be our last chance." Marks nodded and quickly typed into the console, trying to get the message through. His face grew darker with each passing second. "The jamming signal is stronger," he said. "It's blocking everything. We're isolated, Commander." Sarah's gut twisted in anxiety. No allies, no communication with Earth, no help on the way. This was it. Humanity was on its own. "We need to know who we're fighting," Sarah muttered, pacing the control room. "What do we know about their ship? Anything at all?" "We've got a few readings," Marks replied, "but nothing conclusive. It's built with advanced technology, far beyond anything we've ever seen. It seems to be using some kind of energy weapon. We can't get a full scan. The jamming is interfering with all our systems. We have to know their weak points." Sarah said, determination setting in. "Get everyone to work. We need answers, and we need them now." As the crew scrambled, Sarah couldn't help but feel a deep, unsettling sense of unease. The warship was relentless. Every minute that passed, it drew closer. But who was the enemy? And why were they targeting them? Sarah's mind raced, but no matter how many scenarios she ran, the answers never came. Was this an invasion? Was Earth's war coming to them? Or was there something else, something deeper at play? The crew worked tirelessly, trying to patch the damage as quickly as they could. But as the minutes stretched on, the growing realization set in. Time was running out. They were too small. The station was vulnerable, and the warship was powerful beyond measure. Then, a voice broke through the tension, echoing through the command room. "Commander, we got something. A transmission. Weak, but it's coming from the enemy ship." Sarah's eyes shot up. A transmission. Were they about to communicate with them? "Put it on," Sarah said, her voice sharp. The screen flickered, and static buzzed in the air. Slowly, a figure began to appear on the monitor. Tall, imposing, with a metallic mask covering their face. The voice that came through was calm, yet chilling. "This is the Empire of the Unseen." The words sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. "You are being observed, Commander. Your resistance will be futile." Sarah's blood ran cold. The voice was calm, but there was an underlying threat in every word. "We are not your enemies," Sarah shouted, but the transmission cut off abruptly, the screen going dark. Sarah stared at the blank monitor, her mind spinning. The Empire of the Unseen. The name felt ancient, almost mythical. But one thing was clear. They were not here for peace. Her crew was watching her, waiting for direction. They were facing an enemy that was not only unknown but seemingly unstoppable. "We need to figure out their weaknesses," Sarah said firmly. "Prepare for a fight. If they think we'll surrender, they're wrong." The crew nodded, and the tension in the room thickened. The warship loomed closer, its massive form now visible through the station's windows, and the Empire of the Unseen had made their message clear. They weren't here to talk, and they weren't leaving without a fight. A glimpse of victory, then the betrayal. The crew of the station worked tirelessly through the night. Sarah could feel the weight of every second ticking by. Each moment spent waiting for the enemy to strike felt like an eternity. Despite the terrifying odds, there was still a glimmer of hope. The crew had managed to stabilize their systems, and the shields were holding for now. But that was all they had. Time. The unknown warship loomed ever closer. It felt like a monstrous shadow, a massive wall of metal and destruction. It sent tremors through the station with each calculated move. Sarah watched the readings intently, trying to anticipate the next move. "We're within their firing range," Lieutenant Marks called out, his voice tense. "Keep the shields up," Sarah ordered. Her heart raced in her chest. "If we can't find a way to fight back, we'll be destroyed. We have to hold out long enough for something to change. We need a break." Just as Sarah began to lose hope, Ensign Keller, the weapons officer, spoke up. His voice cracked with excitement. "Commander, I think we found something. There's a weak point in their hull, a vulnerable section that could be exploited. It's not much, but it's a chance." Sarah's eyes widened. Could this be their opening? "Tell me everything you know," she said, her voice sharp with determination. Keller quickly pulled up a 3D scan of the enemy warship on the console. "There's an area near their engine core, exposed with less defense. It could be a blind spot in their system. If we can hit it with a concentrated shot, we might be able to disable their engines or cause serious damage." The hope that had been slowly fading reignited in Sarah's chest. "It's not much, but it's something. We can't let it slip away. Get the weapon systems ready for a focused strike." The crew scrambled to prepare, quickly reprogramming the station's weapons to aim directly at the weak point Keller had identified. Sarah could feel the tension building. This could be their only chance. They had no idea how much time they had before the warship unleashed its full firepower on them, but they were about to take their shot. Firing in 3, 2, 1. Keller counted down. The station's weapons charged up, energy building in the core. The crew braced themselves, eyes fixed on the screen as the beam of concentrated fire shot from the station's cannons. For a moment, it seemed like they had succeeded. The energy beam hit the weak point with a massive explosion. "Direct hit," Keller shouted. The entire station shook with the impact of the blast, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they had won. The enemy warship faltered, its movement slowing, and the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. For the first time in hours, they allowed themselves to believe that they had made a dent in the seemingly invincible enemy. But just as quickly as their hope blossomed, it was shattered. A deafening roar filled the station's command center. A second wave of energy hit them, much stronger than the first, knocking the crew to the ground. Sparks flew from the consoles, and the lights flickered violently. The warship is retaliating. They've activated some kind of countermeasure. Marks yelled, struggling to get back to his feet. Sarah wiped the blood from her lip, her head spinning. Damage report. "We've lost control of some of the station's primary systems. Shields are down to 30%. If they hit us again, we won't survive." Keller shouted, frantic as he worked the controls. The crew scrambled, but it was clear. The retaliation was devastating. The warship's counterattack had been faster and more powerful than they had ever expected. The blast had not only damaged their shields, but it also left them vulnerable to a second wave of fire. But what made Sarah's heart drop was the message that appeared on the communication screen. It was brief but clear. "Your resistance was expected, Commander. Your fate is sealed. There is no escape." It wasn't just an attack. It was a message. The Empire of the Unseen knew exactly who they were dealing with, and they were toying with them. Suddenly, the dark figure from the enemy transmission appeared on the screen again. The metallic mask glimmered coldly in the dim light, and the voice that followed was laced with mocking confidence. "You fight with courage, Commander Blake, but it is futile. You cannot stop what has already been set in motion. Your failure is inevitable." Sarah's stomach twisted. The words were designed to break them, to make them feel powerless. But she wouldn't give in. She had a crew depending on her. They hadn't come this far to give up. "You're wrong," Sarah shouted at the screen. "We won't back down. Humanity never surrenders." The figure's response was cold and emotionless. "Then you will watch your world burn." The transmission cut out again, leaving Sarah with an unsettling silence. The warship's movements grew more precise as it closed in on them. It was only a matter of time before the final blow was delivered. But then, just as Sarah's heart sank further into despair, something strange happened. A figure in a dark uniform appeared at the back of the command room. A man who Sarah didn't recognize, but who carried himself with a sense of authority that made everyone pause. His eyes scanned the room, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. "I'm sorry," the man said softly, his voice low. "But this warship, it's not here for Earth." The crew turned to face him, bewildered. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her confusion evident. "Humans are not the target," he replied, stepping forward. "They've come for something else entirely. And if we don't act quickly, it will be too late." The man's words hung in the air, shrouded in mystery. Was this a potential ally, or was it another layer of betrayal in this already complex nightmare? Whatever it was, Sarah knew one thing. The real battle was only just beginning. Human resolve in the face of overwhelming power. The man's presence seemed to shake the crew from their stunned silence. The commander, Sarah Blake, was the first to react. She stood up straighter, trying to regain her composure, but her mind was spinning. What did he mean by "they've come for something else entirely"? Why were the humans being dragged into this terrifying conflict? "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, her voice firm. though uncertainty lingered. "And what do you know about this warship?" The man didn't respond immediately. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes scanning the room, observing each of the crew members, as if weighing them in some unseen way. Finally, his gaze met Sarah's, and he spoke in a voice that was low but full of urgency. "I am Commander Harlan Calloway," he said, "and I've been sent to warn you. The enemy warship, the Empire of the Unseen, isn't here to conquer Earth. They're looking for something specific, something that has been hidden for millennia, something that you humans have kept secret." Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. Hidden. Secret. Her mind raced. There were no secrets that she knew of that were worth an all-out invasion from an empire. But before she could respond, Harlan continued. "They'd been tracking a relic, a piece of technology older than Earth itself. And it's on this station, right under their noses." He glanced around the command room, as if making sure no one overheard. "The moment they find it, the Earth will fall. There's no negotiating. They'll destroy everything to get it." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. A relic. Hidden technology. It all sounded like something out of a sci-fi novel, but Sarah had no time for doubts. The stakes were too high. "What kind of technology?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Harlan hesitated before answering, the weight of his words making the air even heavier. "It's something that can shift the balance of power in the galaxy, something that could give its possessor unimaginable strength. But it's dangerous, and its discovery could bring about the end of humanity." A cold silence settled over the crew. They had never been prepared for something like this, a hidden weapon that could change the course of everything. Sarah's mind raced. If this relic was so powerful, why hadn't anyone told her about it? How could something so important have remained hidden? "How do you know all this?" she asked, voice tight with suspicion. Harlan's gaze flickered. "I've been following their movements for years. I knew they were coming. That's why I'm here now." Sarah didn't trust him fully, but there was no time to question further. The enemy was closing in. The warship's weapons were still active, and any minute they could launch another devastating attack. "Where is it?" Sarah demanded. "This relic, where is it?" Harlan's face grew more serious. The warship's devastating attacks had already left scars on the station's exterior. The shields had held, but just barely. They couldn't survive much longer. Sarah's mind raced. They had to secure the relic and find a way to use it to stop the Empire of the Unseen from completely annihilating them. The vault door loomed ahead, an imposing structure of solid metal, much heavier and more reinforced than anything they had encountered so far. Harlan stepped forward, his fingers moving swiftly across a hidden panel on the wall. With a mechanical hiss, the door slid open, revealing the dark space beyond. Inside, the vault was much larger than Sarah had expected. Shelves upon shelves of ancient artifacts and objects from across the galaxy lined the walls. Some were unidentifiable, their forms strange and otherworldly. But it was clear from the way Harlan's eyes scanned the room that the relic they were searching for was not far. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's here somewhere." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. They began searching through the rows, their movements tense and hurried. Every second felt like a minute, and every minute felt like an hour. As they searched, Sarah's thoughts kept drifting back to the warship, its relentless assault, its weapons that seemed almost unstoppable. Could this relic really give them the power they needed to fight back? Or was it too dangerous, too unpredictable? "Commander, over here." Harlan's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to find Harlan standing before a large ornate chest-like structure, unlike anything else in the vault. His hand hovered over it, his fingers trembling slightly as if afraid of what might be inside. Sarah approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. Harlan opened the chest, revealing a small glowing object, an ancient crystal, its surface shimmering with an unnatural light. It seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were alive. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the relic that the Empire of the Unseen had been searching for. "This is the one," Harlan said softly. "This is what they've been hunting." Sarah reached out slowly, her hand trembling as she touched the crystal. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of energy rushed through her, and her vision blurred for a split second. It was like 1,000 images flashed before her eyes. Memories, landscapes, and alien civilizations that she couldn't recognize. She pulled her hand back quickly, disoriented. "What was that?" she asked, breathless. Harlan's face was pale, his expression grim. "It's linked to the ancient technology of the Unseen Empire. Whoever holds it controls vast power." Before Sarah could process his words, a loud crash echoed through the vault. The door they had entered from exploded inward, sending debris flying. Instinctively, Sarah pushed Harlan behind her heart racing. The team upstairs had been fighting, and now the enemy was here. "Get ready," Sarah whispered. "They found us." The warship's soldiers, suited in sleek black armor, stormed through the door. They were armed with weapons that glowed with dangerous energy, their presence filling the vault with an overwhelming sense of hostility. Sarah's pulse quickened. She had known it was only a matter of time before the enemy made their move, but seeing them now, up close, was like facing an insurmountable wall of destruction. Harlan grabbed the relic and held it tightly in his hands. "We can't let them have it. This is humanity's only chance." Sarah nodded, her jaw clenched. "We fight. For Earth. For humanity." The first wave of soldiers charged toward them, weapons raised, energy pulses crackling in the air. Sarah's team fought back with everything they had. Blasting weapons, quick maneuvers, and sheer willpower. But the enemy was overwhelming. For every soldier they took down, 2 more appeared, pressing them closer and closer into a corner. A shot grazed Sarah's shoulder, but she barely flinched. She returned fire, taking down an enemy soldier with a well-placed shot. But as they continued to fight, the warship's soldiers began to gain ground. Sarah could feel the pressure building. They couldn't keep this up much longer. "Commander," Harlan shouted, his voice urgent. "We need to leave now. The vault is rigged with fail-safes." Sarah's eyes widened. "Fail-safes." Harlan nodded grimly. "If we don't get out now, this entire area will implode." The battle raged on around them, but Sarah knew what had to be done. They couldn't let the enemy have the relic, and they couldn't afford to let the vault explode either. "Fall back," she yelled, turning to lead her crew toward the exit. But as they made their way toward the vault's exit, another loud explosion shook the room. A massive blast from the warship's energy weapons tore through the walls of the vault. Sarah and her team barely escaped, but the blast sent them flying to the ground. The door to the vault slammed shut behind them, locking them in. The relic was safe, for now, but the warship's soldiers were closing in. Time was running out. Suspense. Sarah's crew had barely made it out, but they were still in danger. The warship's soldiers were relentless, and now they had the relic. Could it be enough to change the tide of the battle, or was it already too late for humanity? The fight was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. The ultimate sacrifice. The sudden explosion rocked the station, throwing Sarah and her crew to the floor. The air filled with the sound of twisting metal and the shuddering groans of the station's failing infrastructure. Sarah struggled to regain her footing, her heart racing, her thoughts chaotic. They were not out of danger yet. The warship's soldiers were closing in on them, and the relic they had fought so hard to secure was now their only bargaining chip in a desperate fight for survival. "We need to move," Sarah shouted, pulling Harlan to his feet. The team gathered around her, their faces strained with exhaustion and fear, but they knew what needed to be done. The vault's exit was only a few corridors away, but already the sound of enemy footsteps echoed down the hallways. The warship's soldiers were methodical in their approach, advancing on the crew with ruthless precision. Sarah's team had to move fast, and they had to move quietly. As they slipped through the station's narrow corridors, Sarah kept her focus on the mission. The relic was too important. If they could get it to the station's command center, they might be able to turn the tide. But they needed to make it there first, and the enemy wasn't going to make it easy. "We can't outrun them forever," Ensign Keller said, panting as he kept pace behind Sarah. "We need a plan to hold them off." Sarah thought fast. The station's defensive systems were still operational, but they were barely holding up. The enemy warships' attacks had crippled much of their security, and their weapons were no match for the Empire's advanced technology. But there was one thing the humans had: determination. If they were going to survive, they'd need to outsmart their enemies, use the station's environment to their advantage. "Head for the weapons bay," Sarah said, making a quick decision. "If we can make it there, we can buy some time. We'll fight them on our terms." The crew nodded, and they changed direction, heading toward the weapons bay where Sarah knew they could access the station's last remaining high-powered cannons. They moved swiftly, silently, their footsteps muffled in the dim, flickering light of the corridors. Every now and then, they heard the sound of enemy soldiers passing by, their footsteps too close for comfort. "We're almost there," Sarah whispered, just as they turned the final corner. But as they reached the weapons bay entrance, Sarah's worst fear became reality. The doors were locked, and the emergency override wasn't responding. They were trapped. The only way into the weapons bay was through a security code, one that they no longer had the time to unlock. "We're running out of options," Lieutenant Marks said, his voice tight with panic. "They'll be here any second." Sarah's mind raced. The situation was dire. They had the relic, but if they couldn't fight back, it wouldn't matter. And then it happened, something Sarah didn't expect. Harlan stepped forward, his face set in grim determination. "There's one way," he said, his voice steady. "I can override the security systems." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You can?" she asked. Harlan nodded slowly. "It's a risk, but if we're going to survive, it's the only chance we have." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of enemy soldiers grew louder. They were closing in fast. Harlan turned to the rest of the crew. "I'll stay behind. You go. I'll hold them off." "No," Sarah shouted. "You can't." "I have to," Harlan cut her off, his voice fierce. "If I don't, they'll take the relic. You need to keep it safe. I've already made my choice." Sarah's heart sank. She knew the risks, and she knew what Harlan was offering. It was the ultimate sacrifice, a chance to buy the crew a few extra seconds to escape, to secure humanity's future. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just doing this for the crew. He was doing it for humanity. "Harlan," she began, but her voice cracked. Harlan placed a hand on her shoulder. "I've made my peace, Commander. Go, get the relic to safety. The rest is in your hands." The crew stood frozen for a moment, each member processing the weight of the decision. There was no more time for hesitation. With a final, determined nod, Sarah turned and gestured to her team. "Move out. We'll hold them off as long as we can." Sarah's voice was firm, though her heart ached. She knew that Harlan's sacrifice meant they had to succeed. There was no other choice. The crew sprinted down the hallway, their eyes fixed on their destination, the command center. But as they ran, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Harlan's face from her mind. He was giving everything to ensure their survival. If they failed, it would be because they hadn't lived up to the sacrifice he was making. As they reached the command center, Sarah quickly entered the security code, the doors sliding open. Inside, the crew rushed to activate the station's last line of defense. The relic was placed into the control system, its energy flaring as it interfaced with the station's mainframe. It was now ready to be used. Humanity's greatest weapon was at their fingertips. But then, as Sarah prepared to activate the station's final defense, an explosion rocked the station once again. The walls shuddered as the enemy's warship unleashed another devastating attack. The lights flickered, and the command center systems struggled to stay online. "Commander," Lieutenant Marks shouted, his voice filled with alarm. "We need to act now. We can't hold out much longer." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the relic, her hands trembling. The decision was hers. With a deep breath, she reached for the control panel, knowing that activating the relic could change everything. But it could also have consequences they weren't ready for. Suspense. With Harlan's sacrifice echoing in her mind, Sarah had to make the ultimate decision. Would activating the relic be humanity's salvation, or would it unleash forces far beyond their control? As the warship's soldiers closed in, Sarah had only one choice left: to risk everything for humanity's survival. Victory against the odds. Sarah's hand hovered over the relic's activation panel. The air in the command center was thick with tension, each second feeling like an eternity. The warship's weapons were still hammering against the station, and the crew had done everything they could to hold back the invaders. The last hope rested with the relic. It was humanity's only chance to turn the tide, to stop the empire of the unseen before it was too late. "Commander," Lieutenant Marks said, his voice trained but urgent, "we have to act now. The warship is too close." Sarah's heart raced as she glanced at the crew. Every face in the room was filled with a mixture of fear, hope, and resolve. They had no other options left. The sacrifice of their comrades, the hours of fighting. It had all led to this one moment. The relic held the power to save them, but no one knew for sure what it would unleash. She glanced at the relic again, its energy pulsing faintly in the dim light. It had to work. It had to. With a steadying breath, Sarah slammed her hand down on the activation button. The moment her fingers made contact, the relic flared with a brilliant light, far brighter than anything the station's power systems could have generated. The entire room was bathed in blinding energy, and for a split second, Sarah felt like she was floating in an endless void. Then, with a thunderous roar, the power surged through the entire station. The walls trembled violently, and for a moment, it felt as if the very fabric of space was bending under the force. But it was not the station that was breaking. It was the warship. The warship's weapons faltered. Its energy shields flickered, and the ship seemed to shudder in space. The crew watched in awe as the warship's massive form began to twist, its once impenetrable hull showing signs of cracking under the pressure. "What's happening?" Keller shouted, eyes wide with disbelief. The control systems on the station buzzed with life. The relic had activated something far beyond what anyone had expected. The energy released from it was not just a weapon. It was a force that disrupted the very fabric of the warship's systems. The empire of the unseen had underestimated the power they were dealing with. The relic was not just a weapon. It was the key to a force that could reshape the battle itself. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline as the warship's engines began to sputter and fail. The massive vessel that had threatened to annihilate them was now buckling under its own power. The crew had done the impossible. But they weren't done yet. "We need to finish this," Sarah said, her voice resolute. She turned to Marks. "Get the remaining cannons online. If the warship is disabled, we take the shot and make sure they can't recover." "We're on it, Commander," Marks replied, immediately moving to the console. The warship, now faltering and slowing in its approach, was vulnerable. The empire of the unseen had no backup plan for this, no contingency for a human resistance armed with ancient, unknown power. As the station's remaining weapons charged, the crew positioned themselves for the final strike. The tension was palpable. They could feel the weight of the moment, the culmination of their struggle, of their fight for survival. "Target locked," Mark said, eyes focused on the screen. "Ready to fire on your command." Sarah glanced at the warship, which now appeared helpless in the vastness of space. The enemy soldiers, though still scattered across the station, were retreating as their ship lost power. They were no longer a threat, not while the warship was in disarray. With a deep breath, Sarah gave the order. "Fire." The station's cannons unleashed their full power, and the beam shot out, connecting directly with the warship's core. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. The blast struck with perfect precision, and the warship erupted in a flash of light. The force of the explosion rippled through space, shaking the very stars around it. Sarah and her crew shielded their eyes as the station trembled from the blast. The sound of the warship's destruction echoed through the command center, and the station's systems flickered with the aftershocks. When the light faded and the shockwaves settled, the warship was gone, disintegrated, reduced to a mass of drifting debris. A triumphant silence followed, broken only by the quiet hum of the station's systems as they gradually regained stability. "We did it," Lieutenant Marks breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." Sarah's heart was still pounding in her chest, but a wave of relief washed over her. They had won. Against all odds, humanity had fought back and triumphed over the seemingly unstoppable force of the Empire of the Unseen. But the victory didn't feel like the end. Sarah knew that while they had struck a powerful blow, the galaxy was vast, and the Empire would not forget this humiliation. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles. "We've won this fight," Sarah said, her voice strong but tinged with resolve. "But the war is far from over. We've proven that humanity will never back down, no matter the odds. We will always fight, and we will always win." The crew nodded, their spirits lifted. They had done the impossible. They had survived. And as Sarah looked out at the stars through the station's windows, she knew one thing for certain. Humanity's story was just beginning. Cliffhanger. As the crew took a moment to catch their breath, Sarah's eyes scanned the radar. Something was off. A faint signal, barely detectable, was coming from deep space. A new fleet, even larger than the last, approaching fast. The war wasn't over yet. End of story.